Okay, we'll start off with wind. Of course, that's the first one up there. Wind is the fastest growing segment of the alternative energy market. Even though I said I don't want to use that term, alternative energy, but it's still, people usually think of one or the other. And a big part of this is because it can be very practical to own a wind turbine, very profitable. Excuse me. And so if you're in a location where you've got steady winds and you're close to the grid, and you can afford $3 million to buy a wind turbine, you can hook that baby up and make tens of thousands of dollars a year just by having it there on your property. So, but wind energy is definitely geographically limited, which means what? Geographically limited. Yeah, Shane? What? Not a lot of places that you have a constant minimum 12 mile per hour wind on a regular basis, and that's what it called. That's what's generally the guidelines for being able to have a productive wind energy output. They're designing some that work at lower wind speeds and some that handle gusts and everything as well, but those aren't ideal conditions. Ideal conditions are where you're in an area where the wind is pretty constant on an almost daily basis. You get a minimum 12 miles per hour of wind. We don't get that here in Florida, in Central Florida. There are areas along the coast that do, and coastlines are ideal for wind energy because they do tend to have that constant, though not high. Really high winds is not good, as you might imagine. And these things are designed to stop working usually after about 45 miles per hour, because if they don't, the input, the energy that goes through it would, in one case, blew them up. There's a video, I think, on YouTube where it shows a wind turbine that either the mechanism to disengage it didn't work or just didn't have one, and gusts of 60, 80 miles per hour, and it caused it to explode because it overheated the generator and everything in it. So that is because it is actually a high quality source of energy. There is quite a bit of power in there, and as a matter of fact, one of those big wind turbines will generate about 3 megawatts of energy, and that's a lot. That is, your average coal-fired plant generates about 50 megawatts of electricity. So that's a whole plant devoted to generating electricity, and just one of these wind turbines under optimal conditions will deliver, about a 15th of that. So that's pretty high quality. Does have definite geographical limitations, and that's the only thing restricting it from being more popular, but it is the fastest growing segment of the so-called alternative energy market. They do use actually relatively large amounts of land. All right, so now this is kind of a situation of depending upon where you are. Because the footprint of one of these structures it's not huge. It's like maybe a quarter of the size of the room, the base that it sits on. But if you're going to have them, you've got to have clear land. So if you're thinking, oh, I'd like to have a wind farm in this forested area, you would have to clear out the whole forest to use it. Because the wind, not only do the propellers and everything obviously have to move, the propellers are pretty big, the trees would block the wind and it wouldn't be practical. So that's even though, like I said, the physical size of it's not that great, but the amount of area that it needs. But in grasslands, like I said, ranchers are making use of these and generating, basically becoming their own power companies, because if you do have an open field area, you can put them out there, and the cattle don't seem to have a problem with it and things like that. But they, in general, they do require a fair amount of land to put up there. Also, as you might imagine, they have a definite impact on bird and bat populations. At the beginning, they simply run into them and kills them, obviously. But after a while, they figure it out and they just avoid it. But what that means is you're pushing these particular animals out of that area. Another thing that is an issue with wind power is that they create noise pollution, and that's annoying to people, but also it also pushes these animals away from those areas, Whenever you do that, it's like a refugee problem. Ecosystems are usually maxed out population-wise. That's how natural selection works, and you end up getting everything in what they call carrying capacity. Stuff we'll talk about later. But what that means is that if you take organisms out of one area and for whatever reasons you push them into other areas, you will significantly impact that area that they're going into. And therefore, you know, you have a lot bigger effects than just, oh, they'll just move out of the way and they'll go live in this part of the woods and stuff like that. It doesn't work that way. That causes a lot of environmental, ecological impacts that spread beyond that. So that's part of what I mean by the fact that the physical structure of it is not huge. However, the amount of land and everything that basically changes or alters is pretty big for wind farms. Particularly if they're going to actually be a farm. A lot of times they're isolated, but they're going to devote a serious amount of land to it. It has a large amount of habitat that it needs to take up. So this also, what they found is that with birds at least, if they're migratory birds and these wind farms or these wind turbines disrupt their migration patterns, that can be disastrous for a flock of birds. They have to refuel at certain areas, so it's kind of like if you don't plan your trip right, you can run out of gas, except they're running out of gas means they starve to death. So we have seen, that has been shown, documented, that there have been definite impacts where wind turbines have been put in, definite impacts on the bird and bat populations. All right, questions about wind as a source of energy? Geothermal is constant. When you have geothermal available, that hot magma is there, of course, all the time. So it's not a problem with being intermittent like this one. And by the way, back on wind for a minute, remember that if they are intermittent, then you need to have, you want to use it as a constant power supply, then you'll need a backup or storage, just like solar. Geothermal, on the other hand, is constant. But it is also geographically limited, has limited availability around the world, more so than wind, anyway, because if you think about it, there's not that many places around the world where it is volcanic in those areas. As we become better at drilling, we open up more opportunities with this particular type of energy resource. So the more you can drill down, the deeper you can drill down, the easier it is to drill down, the more you can access this heat source. Okay, and that's something, believe it or not, that is something engineering-wise that is constantly being developed and worked on, because of course we're getting to not only that, but getting to oil, getting to precious metal resources, all those kind of things involve drilling into the crust of the earth. And so that's actually a whole, like I said, a whole field of technology is devoted to doing that. And as we get better at that, these things become more reliable. What you get from there is hot enough to boil water, so you know that anytime you have a heat source that's hot enough to boil water, you can run a steam turbine and generate electricity, or of course you could use that heat directly. So just bring it up through pipes, steam comes up through pipes and everything, and use it like a radiator. You can do it that way. Or like I said, it is hot enough that you can generate electricity from it as well. Sometimes these areas, like if it's Yellowstone, for example, which, as you might imagine, uses a lot of geothermal, they have their own water source, so their own natural water source, so you get the steam already. Some of them, they are dry, and so they will use a water resource to do that. So that is an impact of it, or a cost of it, is the fact that it does require water to be used. That water is basically used up and in the process. And so those are your main pluses and benefits. The biggest drawback is your very few places where you can actually use it, but it is good constant source, and it is low impact on the environment. It's kind of expensive to set them up as well, as you might imagine. They've got a lot of backup things and everything that goes with it, but otherwise relatively good for the environment. Also, there is a water resource usage. There's some air pollution that is generated a little bit that's from these things, and I'll show you that in a minute. Finally, biomass. Biomass, the oldest type of energy resource. So that would count whenever people figured out how to light a piece of wood on fire, they were utilizing an energy resource. That wood is biomass because it is recently living. Well, it's either recently living or it comes from something that is recently or currently living. And what I mean by that is it's either the bodies of an organism, which would be the case if you have a tree, or the waste products of an organism. So feces can be used as a source and has been used as a source. Dung has been used as a source of heat and energy for a long time. If you think about the kind of societies and tribal groups where they raised cattle or whatever kind of grazing herbivore they were, they would do that. They would live on the grasslands. Grasslands don't have a lot of trees, so they need a resource to burn. They had plenty of cow poop, and it burns quite well. And if you've ever been around horses or cows or anything else like that, their dung is, it's got a lot more fiber in it, doesn't smell nearly as bad, doesn't have nearly as much sulfur in it as carnivore, omnivore, so it's not as bad as you may think using that as a source of fuel, but that is an example of biomass. But then another thing nowadays that they're doing with biomass, so much more recent developments, is taking these natural products and producing or converting them into something, in particular something that will burn in a standard internal combustion engine, like you have cars and trucks and stuff. So you can burn it directly. And by the way, in burning, you can use that heat just as a source of heat, or you can use that heat to run a steam engine, run a steam turbine. Biomass, one example of biomass is garbage. So in some areas it's common to take the garbage. They're taking out the plastic, so that would be a fossil fuel if you're really getting technical about it. But a lot of what's left is food waste and paper from the garbage, and they will then burn that in one of these power plants and generate electricity from it. One of the problems to be solved with energy resources is to find something that our vehicles can run off of easily, and that has been done to a certain extent with biomass in the case of converting it either to natural gas. By the way, it's easy to run an internal combustion engine off of natural gas or propane. It's a very simple conversion, and they run actually better off that than gasoline. They'll run for a longer period of time. Biodiesel is basically usually they use cooking oil or used cooking oil. You may know if you've ever worked in a place that has the big deep fat fryers, they've got to dispose of that. Sometimes they'll take that old fryer oil and sell it to an electrical generating company. They can burn that in there. But also, after filtering it, it doesn't take much treatment to make what's known as biodiesel, and most diesel engines will run completely fine off of biodiesel fuel. So that's a win-win kind of situation. Plus, you're driving around smelling like French fries. You can't French fries and fried chicken. Can't beat that. But that's an example of something that's done that can be put into an automobile and used. But the most common way to do it is to convert it into ethanol. It's actually one of also the most famous, or not famous, most old-fashioned ways of converting biomass energy, but a lot of times that was converted into that not as a fuel source, but as a what source?
Drinking?
A drinking source. Yeah, this is the ethanol that's in alcoholic beverages and comes from fermentation. So, but you may notice also at the fuel pump, where do you see this particular word? Ethanol. What's it tell you about your fuel, your gasoline, those you have ever fueled up? Up to what?
Flammable.
Well, it's flammable, yeah, of course. Yeah. What about the composition? Up to 10% of this gasoline, not corn, although it's made from corn. Ethanol. Up to 10% of your gasoline contains ethanol. It'll tell you that on there. Almost every gas station, that's the case for it now. And this is, like I said, this has been the biggest application of biofuels, is the mixing of it with gasoline. This is relatively new. This happened in 2008, I think, somewhere in that time period when demand for oil was so high, because that was before the economy crashed. Demand for oil was so high, not only in the United States, but also in China and India, that gas prices went up to about $4 a gallon. And then as an industry, and I don't know if the government had anything to do with it, but they just decided to say, hey, let's start to produce ethanol as a fuel and reduce our usage of foreign oil. And so that's the big inspiration for the gasoline ethanol mixtures. Pretty much all cars can run off of up to 10%. And if you have a flex fuel car, they can run off of up to, I think, 85% ethanol.
Where would you get like a mixture like that? 85%?
Of up to 85%? I don't know. You could make your own moonshine, I guess, and toss it in the tank. But so you can pull over and just sip some out of the gas tank as you're going along or whatever. Yeah. So this has been done, like I said, with a flex fuel car. You can run a higher amount of ethanol in your gasoline. That is the most common case of your conversion of biomass fuels into something they can run off of. Biomass is carbon neutral. So here's one of the environmental benefits of it. I want you guys to make sure you understand what carbon neutral means. This has to do with the issue of greenhouse gases, in particular, carbon dioxide. Okay, so you can look at my little diagram over here, the artiste that I am, and you can see that there's corn there, believe it or not. That green part is a stalk of corn. I'll have a yellow marker. As it is growing through photosynthesis, what's it absorbing out of the atmosphere? CO2. Okay, we want to reduce the problems with global warming and the excess greenhouse gases. We want to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Okay, so then you take that ethanol, take that corn, turn it into ethanol, put it in the tank of a car, burn it. That carbon that was in there, that came from here, is going to be oxidized. It's going to react with oxygen in the air and produce carbon dioxide again. That's why all organic things, when they burn, produce carbon dioxide. And so it's going to go right back in the atmosphere to be absorbed again. So there's no net gain if you're just burning ethanol. There's no net increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that's coming from that. If, however, you take your carbon source from underground, from fossil fuel deposits, to petroleum, and put it in the vehicle, then when you burn that and the carbon dioxide is released, that is a new source of carbon dioxide that increases carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, because you're basically releasing the CO2 that was in the atmosphere 200 million years ago. So that's why burning fossil fuels is not carbon neutral, whereas burning biomass fuels is. Is everybody clear on that, what carbon neutral means? How that does not cause a net increase in the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere? Okay? Yeah.
Are we likely to keep producing more ethanol, like steadily?
All right, that's a good question. Let me cover that and whether or not we're going to stay down this road and why don't we do this only, etc. And that has to do, well, here's one issue, big issue with using biomass fuel. Not so much with ethanol, but with like using garbage or wood, or chicken farmers, for example, sell their chicken poop. Some of the times they sell for fertilizer, but they also will sell it with these waste to energy plants and produce those. They produce high amounts of air pollution. And you may remember when we talked about air pollution, I said that the less pure your fuel is, the more air pollution you're going to get from it. Okay? So either way that happens. But then also, as you might imagine, if you're raising this corn and everything for ethanol consumption, that's kind of like saying, oh, we have all this extra land to grow corn on, or we have all this leftover corn. We don't. Typically, there's some crops that they subsidize and stuff like that, but in general, you know, in particular with corn, sugarcane is another one. Those are some of your highest volume crops that are grown around the world. Part of it's for fuel, and then part of it is for the rest is for food, of course. You still have all that environmental impact of raising these biofuels, okay, with fertilizer, pesticides, and all that kind of stuff, just like the things we talked about, the agriculture impact. And that means that if you're raising more of them for fuel, you're raising less for food, or that which is going to be devoted to being grown for food is going to be more expensive. There's a limited amount. We could not devote every single acre in the United States to growing corn or sugar cane or whatever other type of food you would turn into ethanol. It would not supply our fuel needs for the United States on any given day. So that's an issue also. That's one of the things about fossil fuels that you could call on you could say it's on the good side, because you've got millions of years of productivity that you're tapping into when you go into fossil fuels. If you're just going to use biomass, you've got only the productivity of the earth at this very moment, or this particular year for a crop. Most crops grow every year. So that's limited. There's only a certain amount. Granted, it is regenerating, it's renewable, so that's a good thing on a practical level, but there's just not enough of it. Michael, does that somewhat answer your question? Or yeah, because there's, this is a nice little addition to our gasoline mixture, so we can reduce how much petroleum we use. It's good from the CO2 perspective. It is carbon neutral, and also you've got win-win when you're taking garbage and stuff like that would normally be waste, and you have to get rid of it, turning it into electricity. But it does have a lot of its environmental problems, and like I said, there's just not enough capacity to meet our fuel needs by trying to grow it like a crop. That's just not going to work. So, any questions about wind, geothermal, biomass, good, bad, or either wise? No? All right. Thank you. Okay, so energy resources are just that. They're resources. So we have looked at a number of resources in this class, and when we do so, we talk about where we get them from. So we talked about that, things like drilling and mining and stuff like that. We talk about the impact of using these energy resources, so that's a key thing here. In particular, air pollution is a big one there, but we've also talked about nuclear waste and habitat destruction of rivers and other things like that. So you're knowledgeable about those for the different ones we've discussed. We've also focused a little bit on how practical each one of these is, because primarily we get our energy resources right now from burning fossil fuels, particularly coal. We all know that that has a lot of environmental impact, both on the obtaining of it through mining, as well as the burning of it, the air pollution that's produced from that, all those different things have a high impact on the environment. So ideally we can use something else to do those kind of things, but they all have their drawbacks and they all have their practical limitations, and like I said, if it's not practical and inexpensive, it's not going to get used. So those are also considerations that we always have to look at. So we've spanned quite a few of them there in that, and now we look at what we always look at when we look at resources. The final thing we typically tend to look at in those is how to those resources, how to blank those resources. What are we looking for? Always look at this. Measure? Nah, not exactly. You may need to do this to do that, but not exactly measure them. There's a certain amount of them, so we want to make sure that we can conserve them. Thank you. So conservation. So now we're looking at energy conservation. So it doesn't matter what kind of energy you're using. If you use less of it, it's going to mean there's going to be less impact overall. So these particular topics are good for pretty much all your resources. Of course, the different uses of them depends upon what it is that you're trying to do with those. First of all, before we talk about the second law of thermodynamics, let's talk about the first law of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics tells us that energy can neither be what nor what? Created or destroyed. Right. So there's a certain amount of energy out there. Given that, what's the problem? If there's always the same amount of energy in the universe, we don't have more or less of it at any given time, why does it matter whether or not we conserve them? Well, what happens is that we tend to take energy resources, we tend to take this energy, and we want to use it, of course, to do something for us. Otherwise, we wouldn't need it. So we want to use it to propel our vehicles, or to give us electricity for our appliances, or to give us warmth, or whatever from there. And so we need in a certain form what we typically call a high-quality source of energy, high-quality form of energy. Then as we use it, what we tend to do with it is we actually disperse it and create a lower quality energy. But the fact of the matter is that energy is still out there. It's in the environment. It's been given off. It's just dispersed and spread out. and therefore we have to get more of that original energy, high quality energy resource if we want to continue using it to do the things we need to do. So consequently, we have that first law of energy, it's the first law of thermodynamics. We've got a certain amount there, but as we use it in its different forms, as we take it from one form to another, we're going to lose some of that. It's going to go from being a higher quality energy resource to a lower quality energy resource, and that is a necessity by the laws of physics. It's not just a matter of the way we use it, or the things we use it, how we use it. It is a fact of nature that's going to happen. You guys put your phones away, please. Okay, so that particular phenomenon, the fact that you're never going to get 100% of energy when it goes from one form to another devoted to the work you wanted to do, that's called the second law of thermodynamics. And to be more specific, and if you're in physics or you've taken physics or whatever else, you may say, well, what about entropy? That's the entropy part, is what happens to that energy as you go along the way. During that convergent process, some of that energy is going to go towards making the universe more disorganized. So why that's necessary, I don't know, but that's what happens. Okay. So dissipated, escaped, generally group 5, by the way, I don't accept double answers, but since yours are pretty much the same, then I'll go ahead and give you points for it. I'm just going to use a little bit simpler term. We're going to say lost. Now, maybe that's not quite accurate, because like we know, energy is not created nor destroyed. However, as far as it being used for the purpose that we're using it for, to do work, which is what we use the energy for, it's no longer going to be usable to do work with in these cases, that which is lost there. Okay? So, how do we take high quality energy and put it to work? We use machines to do that typically. Okay? How much ends up going from the original energy resource into the work that's being done is known as its efficiency. And the source of energy input is going to be basically the fuel. Okay? It may be potential in the case of chemical energy, like when you put gasoline into your car. And by the way, that's a way to remember it as far as which is input and output. It's easy to get those confused, kind of. Just remember the input one, think that you put gasoline into your car. So that's input. So that's when you put it in a machine, or when you plug in your refrigerator, you have an electrical input into that refrigerator. And how well it does the job it's going to do, that's the work that it's done, is its output. Okay? So in the case of an automobile, that output is going to be how much mass was moved over a particular distance. Okay? And in this example, if you had 1,000 watts of gasoline, I don't know how much that would be in kilograms or gallons or liters or whatever, but if you have a certain amount of gasoline and when you burn it, it produces a certain amount of work that it gets done, in this case 250 watts of energy, or if work is done, then that engine is 25% efficient. The whole car as a vehicle, as a machine, is 25% efficient. So it's your output, your work that's done, over your input, and then divided, make it a percentage. 250 divided by 1,000 times 100 is 25%, right? Okay, so our law of thermodynamics says it will always be, it'll never be more than what amount here, as far as the output. The first law of thermodynamics says it'll never be more than what? 100%. Yeah, you can't create energy, so you're not going to get more energy that comes out of your machine than you put into it. You're not going to get more work out of it than you put into it. Okay, the second law of thermodynamics actually tells us that it's going to be what than 100?
Less than?
It's always going to be less than 100%. So if you do one of these problems, if for example you did this, you flipped it around, and you ended up having 250%, which is what you would get if you did, no, you get 400%, sorry. But if you divided 250 into 1,000, you would end up getting 400%. That's not possible. That's not physically possible, so you know that's the wrong answer. Okay, so whenever you do this, you will get a value that's not only less than, it's like going to be less than 100% when you work this out. Okay? So that's a fact of life. All right. Any questions about energy efficiency, second law of thermodynamics, that good stuff? Okay. Micropower. Now, one of the other physical principles behind this, actually conducting electricity from one point to another, is a form of work. Okay. And there are no perfect conductors, even though you have superconductors that operate, that they have to use special metals and stuff. They still are going to be less than 100% efficient. That means that they're going to have a certain amount of resistance, and that resistance is determined by how far it goes. Okay, so when it comes to electrical power transmission, going from a source of electricity to where it's going to be used, distance matters, and as you go along that distance, you're going to lose power along the way. You want to write this into your notes. That's known as line loss. Okay, the energy that's lost when you transmit something through a conductor as you go along. So this is a common hurdle in energy resource management, because there are a lot of areas where there's an abundance of energy. In the desert, for example, there's abundance of solar energy available. In certain areas, valleys or ridge lines or other kinds of areas, there's an abundant amount of wind energy that's available. But the problem is that if you would take that energy and put it into a power line, by the time it reached where you need it, the populated areas, it would be dissipated to the point where it would no longer be a good energy resource. So one of the strategies for dealing with this is, rather than building large power plants that can be upwards of 30 or 40 miles away. For example, our power comes from where I live, out in Chiliota. It comes from the Indian River, a power plant on the Indian River. So that's, I think, 30 miles from us. So rather than doing that, which is a common process now because it takes a lot of money to build a big power plant and things like that, the idea is to build smaller power generating facilities closer to where people live, and therefore avoid this line loss. So that's the concept behind micropower. It's also it's better to be able to, it makes using alternative energy resources, ones that perhaps are intermittent, like solar and wind. It makes it easier to use those on a smaller level, closer to where they're going to be utilized, and keeping, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that. Alternate. It makes it easier to utilize those because a lot of times with these smaller micropower plants, you stay connected to the grid and you have a backup. So maybe with every housing development that you put in an acre of solar panels, or you put in a wind turbine. You know, devote that area to that. You know, so that's a lot of the ideas of the micropower. That does not mean that, like I said, that does not mean you don't have connection to a more conventional energy resource, but it does mean that you're using a lot of the energy from there. You're using it directly. You're having less line loss, and therefore they can get most of their energy from these wind or solar panels, and then on the off times or at night, etc., they can get some off of the grid, and therefore puts less of an impact on the grid. Any questions? Energy efficiency or micropower? Okay, thank you.